My name is Elise Mercer, United States Navy. I'm 31, unmarried, no children. And last Friday, I stood at the front of the hangar bay aboard the USS Independence Moments, away from being promoted to commander. I had served 12 years, 5 deployments, 3 commendations, and a combat injury that still aches when the air pressure dips low. I had ironed my dress whites the night before, written my remarks by hand, and rehearsed the exact cadence of my salute. And then my sister slapped me, in front of my commanding officer, in front of my crew, in front of the entire strike group. There was a silence that stretched like a blade through steel. And then from behind the formation, a voice cut the air clean. "Touch my wife again and see what happens." It was Admiral Jonathan Reeve. He wasn't my husband. But in that moment, I think he meant it, and everything changed. So... The echo of her slap hadn't faded when my commanding officer, Captain Nadine Holloway, slowly lowered the citation folder mid-sentence. Petty Officer Langston blinked twice. No one moved. Not a single shoe scraped the deck. Even the rotors on the flight line seemed to hesitate in the distance, like the entire base had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. I didn't reach for my face. I didn't speak. I kept my posture, locked eyes forward, muscles rigid beneath the weight of ceremony and shame. My cheek stung, yes, but what burned worse was the silence from everyone who had just watched me be humiliated in full dress uniform. And her. Sabrina stood there in a white sheath dress, heels clicking against the metal floor like punctuation. Her makeup was too perfect for someone who hadn't RSVP'd. Her hands trembled, but not from regret. She was furious at me at the Navy, at the fact that the world didn't orbit her anymore. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I hissed under my breath, stepping between her and Captain Holloway, who hadn't yet recovered from the shock. She pointed a finger at me, like I was the one who had disrupted federal protocol. "You lied to me. You knew Trevor invited me, and you said nothing. I came here thinking you wanted to fix things. I didn't even know you were coming," I said through clenched teeth. Sabrina opened her mouth again, but before the next sentence left her lips, it happened. Rear Admiral Reeve's voice, loud, calm, uncompromising. "Touch my wife again and see what happens." The weight of those words knocked the air out of the hangar. Dozens of heads turned, eyes widened. Someone dropped a clipboard behind the formation. And I just stood there trying to process what the hell he had just said. Reeve walked toward us like he was stepping out of a war film, impeccable, in dress blue's rows of ribbons on his chest, his tone cold enough to stop the sun. "That's Commander Mercer to you," he said to my sister without blinking. "And if you lay another hand on her, I'll personally escort you off this installation." Sabrina stared at him like she'd been slapped herself. "She's not married," she sputtered. "That's none of your concern, but she is my officer, and you're done here." Captain Holloway finally nodded to the executive officer, and just like that, the ceremony dissolved. No formal dismissal, no citation, no promotion. My sailors dispersed quietly, eyes darting confusion thick in the air. Some avoided my gaze. Others offered furtive glances that said everything and nothing. I didn't look back as I followed Reeve toward the administrative wing. My hands didn't shake. But my career, it had just veered into unfamiliar waters. Reeve didn't speak as we walked through the narrow passageways toward the officers' ready room. Sailors cleared the hallway instinctively, offering clipped nods or averting their gaze entirely. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was loaded like the second half of a sentence that hadn't been spoken yet. Inside the ready room was cool and orderly. Leather chairs, framed flight citations, a mahogany coffee cart no one dared touch without permission. Reeve didn't sit. Neither did I. Sabrina paced like a caged animal, eyes darting between us, fury rapidly decaying into something more brittle, panic maybe. Or disbelief. "You're married," she snapped, looking straight at me. "Since when I'm not," I said evenly. She blinked. "Then what the hell was that?" Reeve answered before I could. "That was someone stepping between a commissioned officer and a security breach during an active duty event. I don't care if you're her sister or the Queen of England. You don't lay hands on my personnel. Not here, not ever." His voice didn't rise, but it didn't have to. I'd heard that tone before. Once, during a post-sortie debrief, when a helicopter crew missed a rendezvous window by 12 minutes. The same edge of steel, the same refusal to entertain excuses. "You think you're untouchable because you wear stars on your collar," Sabrina shot back. "You humiliated me. No, I cut in sharp and flat. You humiliated yourself. You showed up uninvited, accessed a secure hangar during a federal ceremony, and assaulted a uniformed officer. You're lucky we're still in a private room. She turned to me, eyes wet but defiant. I thought we were finally talking again. I thought maybe you were ready to stop pretending like I never mattered. I stared at her, not with anger, just clarity. I didn't invite you, Sabrina. I didn't even know you were on base. How did you get clearance? She hesitated. Trevor pulled a favor. He knows someone in base admin. Of course he did. Trevor, the boyfriend, who always knew a defense contractor, with more badges than scruples. He was the type who wore smartwatches to weddings and talked about classified budgets like bar trivia. You could have called, I said. I thought this would mean more. No? Reeve interjected, folding his arms. What this means is that a civilian exploited an access protocol and created a breach. That's not sentiment, that's liability. Sabrina went quiet. Finally, she looked at me. Not the officer, not the sister, just me, and said, Are you going to press charges? No, I said after a beat. But you're leaving, now. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and then turned toward the door, with her chin lifted high, but her shoulders slumped in defeat. When the door shut behind her, the silence that followed wasn't tense. It was clean, like air after lightning. Reeve moved to the corner, poured 2 black coffees, and handed me one without a word. I took it, because we both knew this wasn't over, just cleaner than before. The hangar bay felt colder the next morning, though the temperature hadn't changed. Maybe it was the absence of chaos. Maybe it was what came after the quiet everyone avoids, because it leaves room for reflection. The promotion ceremony had been rescheduled at 0700. No speeches, no music, just duty, just the rhythm of boots across steel, the scent of salt air, and the quiet creak of discipline settling back into place. This time the crew stood smaller, no guests, no families. Just my division Captain Holloway and the brass who mattered. I stood at attention as she read the citation again, this time uninterrupted. My name echoed over the PA with deliberate clarity. My collar itched where the new silver oak leaves had been pinned with practiced hands, but I didn't reach for it. My cover was tucked under my arm, my hands were steady. Captain Holloway finished the last line, with all duties and privileges thereunto. A soft ripple of applause followed, restrained and respectful, Navy style. But behind it, I felt something deeper, resolve solidarity, and maybe even pride. I turned to face them, scanning the rows of faces, men and women, who had seen me be slapped across the face by my own blood, and still watched me show up again, uniform, crisp, spine straight. That wasn't just military bearing, that was message. Petty Officer Laney, barely 22 and still fresh from Pensacola, met my eyes and gave a subtle nod. Not permission, not admiration, recognition. I returned the nod, said nothing, and stepped back into formation. There would be no remarks from me, no rehashing, no mention of what had happened. Not today. Today I let silence say what I couldn't. When the ceremony ended, the crew dispersed in that efficient Navy way movement, without clutter, respect, without ceremony. A few offered quiet congratulations. One handed me a folded note from supply my requisition request had been approved. Mundane things that kept the world spinning. But Reeve wasn't there, and though no one asked, I felt the weight of his absence. Rumors had already started. Some whispered about the slap. Others speculated about the wife comment, some thinking he was protecting a secret relationship, others saying it was just a strategic deflection. Most didn't speak at all, which was fine, because those who mattered had seen the look on his face, and the way he stood not for drama, but for boundary. By noon, I was back in my office boots off logging maintenance cycle reports, with a dull ache behind my eyes. The handprint was gone from my cheek, but the heat of it still lingered, not on my skin, but in memory. Then my door creaked open. Permission to enter. I looked up and didn't need to ask who it was. Rear Admiral Reeve stood there out of dress blues, wearing khakis and a faint smile. Just checking in, he said like nothing unusual had ever happened between us. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something real. He didn't sit at first. Just stood there, hands loose at his sides, eyes scanning the small details of my office, the commendation plaques, the maintenance logs stacked too neatly, the squadron patch thumbtacked beside the window like it belonged to a life less complicated. I heard the ceremony went smoothly, he said. No dramatics this time, I replied. standing as protocol required, even though I knew he hadn't come here for protocol. Reeve finally lowered himself into the chair opposite mine, the faint creak of old leather grounding the moment. He said nothing for a while. Just looked at me not the way commanders evaluate reports, but the way people do when they're about to shift the course of your life. I want to nominate you for a leadership program, he said. The words hit harder than I expected. Sir Paclex. Pacific Command Leadership Exchange, 6 months in D.C. Joint Forces Strategic Planning, real seat-at-the-table work. It's not a formality. I don't hand this out. I stared at him. Why me? He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. Because the last 72 hours could have derailed any officer's credibility. But you didn't flinch. You didn't retaliate. You walked back into that hangar and made sure your team saw you stand upright. You think they missed that I didn't answer? My throat had tightened in a way I hadn't prepared for. You've already led in combat, he continued. I want to see how you lead when the terrain is political, fragile, unpredictable. That takes a different kind of discipline, one I think you already have. Silence settled again, softer this time, less loaded. Then I said what had been circling my thoughts since yesterday. Why did you call me your wife? He gave a small huff through his nose. Not a laugh, more like something he wished he could explain more elegantly. Because I needed it to stop, he said. And because when people think something personal is at stake, they listen differently. That was the fastest way to shift the room, so I was a prop. He looked me in the eye. No. You were a person I chose to protect. There's a difference. My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. I believed him. Not because I needed to, but because there was no calculation behind his words. Just clarity. Doesn't mean it was the right call, he added. But I don't regret it. That was the thing about Reeve. He never dodged consequences. He walked straight into them and asked if you wanted a second cup of coffee while sorting them out. He stood to leave, then paused near the door. You'll hear from the selection board within a week, he said. But I've already put your name forward. I wrote it myself. I watched him walk out, still unsure if I deserved that kind of belief. But deep down, something shifted. Because for the first time since that slap, I wasn't holding my breath anymore. 2 days later, I opened the mailbox outside my off-base apartment to find a thin ivory envelope with my mother's handwriting across the front. No return address, no salutation, just Elise in blue ink, like she wasn't sure if I'd open it. Inside was a folded letter written in tight cursive. I didn't read it right away. I left it on the kitchen counter unopened for hours, like it might explode if I moved too fast. That afternoon, a text pinged on my phone. Sabrina, I'm at North Island for a security debrief. One-time base visit. I asked to see you before I fly out. I stared at the message thumb hovering over the reply button. Logic told me to delete it. Let her go, let it fade. But logic had never been our strongest language. Me fine, 10 minutes. The seawall path, no drama. When I arrived, she was already standing near the low concrete barrier overlooking the Pacific. Hair pulled back, no makeup, jeans and flats. She looked smaller, not physically, just quieter, like the volume had been turned down on her entire life. We didn't hug. We didn't even greet each other. We just walked. About 50 yards in, she spoke. I'm not going to apologize again for the slap. I already did, and you don't need me to. I said nothing. But I will say this, she continued. You surprised me. You didn't just take it. You let it be seen. You let the consequences land. That's new. I stopped walking and looked at her. Maybe it should have happened years ago. Sabrina didn't flinch. Maybe. I spent most of my life absorbing your chaos, I said. Mom called it peacekeeping. But really it was silence. She exhaled slowly, not in protest, but in recognition. I waited. She finally reached into her bag and pulled out a small black box. Here, she said, something you might need in D.C. Inside were a pair of silver anchor cufflinks, polished elegant, etched with the Navy's motto. I blinked. You bought these? I picked them. Trevor paid. That made me laugh against my better judgment. She smiled barely. I may not get everything right, she said, but I know this much. You were always the strong one. I just didn't want to admit it. The wind picked up. The ocean stretched quietly behind us, vast and undemanding. Dad would have been proud of you, she added, even if he didn't know how to say it. That landed differently, Not as a comfort, not even as closure. Just truth. I know, I said softly. We didn't hug when we said goodbye. Just a nod. A truce. The kind that says, I see you. For real this time. Back home, I finally opened the letter from Mom. It was short, awkward, but honest. I haven't always supported you the way I should have it read, but I want to try again. Not out of guilt, out of respect. And for the first time in years, I let that possibility in. Not forgiveness, but forward. The morning of the PACLEX interview arrived with the kind of sharp early silence that reminded me of pre-dawn flight ops quiet, but humming with pressure. I dressed in a soft gray blouse and tailored navy slacks. Civilian attire they'd requested, but nothing casual. I ran a palm down the fabric of my sleeves to smooth invisible creases. My fingers hesitated over the silver cufflinks Sabrina had given me. Then, without thinking too hard, I put them on. The command video suite was dim-lit only by the glow of the monitor and the small amber light over the camera. A junior petty officer helped me test the mic, gave a thumbs up, and left the room. At precisely 1100, the screen blinked to life. 3 faces appeared: an Army colonel, an Air Force Chief Master Sergeant, and a civilian rep from the Department of Defense. Their expressions were trained blank but alert. Commander Mercer, the colonel began. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for the opportunity, sir, I replied, voice steady. We'll begin with a few questions. Candid responses preferred. This isn't about perfection. It's about clarity under pressure. I nodded once. Clarity I could do. The civilian leaned in first. What's the most difficult leadership moment you've faced in uniform? My mind flicked through disasters and deployments, field repairs and medevac runs, but I didn't choose any of them. Last week, I said. During my promotion ceremony, I was physically struck by a civilian in front of my crew. The civilian was my sister. The pause on the line was brief but tangible. And what did you do? The chief asked. I stood still, I answered. I didn't retaliate. I didn't break formation. And the next morning, I returned in uniform, accepted my promotion, and addressed my crew by example, not by explanation. The colonel sat back slightly, nodding. Why? Because leadership, I said, isn't about control. It's about visibility. My sailors didn't need a perfect officer. They needed to see that poise can survive impact. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was acknowledgement. They moved on questions about joint command integration ethics in cyber conflict cross-branch logistics. I didn't flinch, not because I had the answers rehearsed, but because I had lived every one of them. Finally, the civilian asked, why do you want this program I inhaled? Because I'm no longer trying to survive the next tour or outrun my own silence, I said. I want to grow. I want to lead across branches, across systems, and bring the same resilience I've built into environments that don't wait for permission. I want to be the kind of officer who doesn't just hold a title, but changes the expectations behind it. They thanked me. The screen went black. I didn't exhale until a full 10 seconds later. Then I sat alone as that quiet room, cufflinks catching light under the screen's glow, and thought, if I had told this story a year ago, I would have apologized for the slap. Today, I led with it. 3 days after the interview, I was summoned to Captain Holloway's office. No explanation. Just bring your cover. I knew what it meant, but I walked in like I didn't, like the last 2 weeks hadn't turned my life sideways in front of the entire Pacific Fleet. She didn't waste time. You've been selected for PACLEX, she said, closing her planner with quiet finality. Orders will be cut by the end of the week. Temporary duty assignment, Pentagon, 6 months. I kept my posture straight, but something inside me exhaled for the first time in days. I spoke with Admiral Reeves, she added. He said one thing that stuck with me. He said she didn't flinch. That's why they picked you. And frankly, that's why I would have. Thank you, ma'am, I said softly. Make us proud, she replied. Back at my desk, a navy blue box sat waiting. No note, no label, just wait. Inside was a Strike Group Challenge coin, thick gold-plated. The back was engraved with 4 words, steady in the storm. I turned it over in my palm. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder, a promise, a reckoning. I thought about everything that had led here, the slap, the silence, the look in Reeves' eyes when he stepped between me and chaos, like it was nothing, like it was instinct. He hadn't saved me. He'd given me space to stay upright. That night, I walked the catwalk above the hangar one last time. Petty Officer Laney saw me from below and gave a mock salute. DC's not ready for you, Commander. Maybe not. But I was. As I zipped the last of my duffels, my phone buzzed. Reeve selection confirmed. Orders in process. Proud doesn't begin to cover it. I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Thank you for seeing me before I saw myself, because that's what changed. Not the ceremony, not the promotion, not even the coin. It was the moment I stood still in front of everyone, face burning, spine straight, and refused to disappear. And from that moment on, I knew no one gets to define me by how I'm knocked down, only by how I stand back up."